Please welcome Sam Sifton, Tom Colicchio, Andrea Rusing, and Marcus Samuelsson.
I like how Marcus takes a stage.
Right?
I'm Tom Colicchio.
And I'm not.
Oh, wait. Tom, jeez. If you get confused about the two bald guys over here, I'm Sam Sifton, Tom Colicchio. Andrea, welcome. Marcus, nice to see you.
Nice to be here.
What I'd like to talk about today, or what I'd like you to talk about today, is how each of you use the bully pulpit that is afforded to you by your positions to advocate for positive change in our food system and in our food policy from the streets of Harlem, the state of North Carolina, well, geez, all the way to Capitol Hill. That's what I want to start with, how you do it. Go, Tom.
Go. Okay. I got involved in food policy actually through being a hunger advocate. My wife made a film a couple of years back called Place at the Table. Very early on when we started making the film, we realized that people are hungry in this country not because of a lack of food, not because of a lack of resources, but because there wasn't the political will in this country to feed everybody. And so I thought very naively that, well, if you can get this demographic to get to the polls, 47 million people, 48 million people that are using food stamps, well, if you can turn them out to vote, we can actually move the needle here and create a great constituency. Naive, that demographic doesn't necessarily get out to the polls. Michelle Nishan, I'm with you, I wish they would. So then I thought, well, how do I marry this other sort of food movement that I'm involved in, on the chef side of things? How do you actually bring these groups together? And if you get them together, you're going to find that there's a lot of common goals that you have, and things that we care about: feeding people, taking care of animals on the farm, making sure that our system is equitable for everybody. These are goals that we all share. And so that led me to believe that you can create more of a constituency, but then how do you actually take this idea and turn it from a social movement to a political movement? And that led to the founding of Food Policy Action. My feeling is that somehow, some way, some kid from Elizabeth, New Jersey, who the nuns didn't think would amount to much at all, somehow got a soapbox, so I might as well use it for good.
Andrea, Tom mentioned ingredients. I'd like to talk about farm workers. You have done a great deal in North Carolina to shed a light on the, frankly, appalling conditions that many of that state's farm workers work under. Can you talk a little bit about how you've done that and how bringing and the degree to which you've brought those politics into the restaurants and how that works out?
Sure. I haven't done that much other than talk about it a lot.
Well, that's a lot.
But for those of you who don't know, North Carolina is an ag state. There are hundreds of thousands of workers on farms. Some of them H-2A workers, many of them not in North Carolina. They live under, completely appalling conditions where a 5-gallon bucket is considered a laundry facility, and there's no doors and no windows in houses that they live in the winter, et cetera. And a friend of mine was an inspector for H-2A housing, and I would hear stories, and I would go on trips with him occasionally. And, I think how I bring it into the restaurant or how it functions in the restaurant is interesting, because most of my kitchen staff in the restaurant at Lantern in Chapel Hill were born in Mexico. And many of them are undocumented. So, there's this idea that farmers and restaurateurs are both dealing with a labor problem that is a very invisible labor problem in the United States. And because we are invested in caring for our customers and nurturing our customers, both farmers and chefs, in this way that is satisfying, but also entertainment, and there's a lot of projection involved in what people think goes on kind of behind the doors in a restaurant. And so I think insofar as it's connected, that's the connection, is how do we talk to customers and people who love food about these issues.
Marcus, we've talked in the past, you and I, about the divide there is between the pleasures of good food and the necessity that some feel, and clearly all three of you feel, to bring attention to how that good food comes about. and in doing so, improve democracy.
Yeah.
We've said that. Can you talk a little bit about how that works out for you?
Yeah. No, I was thinking about, I think I really started thinking about this actually around after 9/11, and around in that 2002, that time, I'm like, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of doing all this work, and what can I contribute besides, filling my restaurant in Midtown? And it was great, but I started to look at the huge divide between what comes out of urban America and what's in and of urban America from a food point of view. What was the opportunities, and how poverty sort of hits this country very, very different, and food choices versus hits, let's say, Ethiopia. And if you line up 100 people, people probably think that Ethiopia's poverty issue with food is probably worse than American. I would argue probably not,
Can you unpack that a little?
Yeah, so if you live in the rural country in Ethiopia, you're eating A, with a spiritual compass, and B, you're eating essentially very healthy food for you. If you're living in an urban area in America, let's say in a project 5 blocks away from a restaurant east, you're surrounded with very, 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 we all know this, everyone in this room is surrounded with very, very, very bad food options, right? You might have clean water, you might have great cable TV, whatever, but your food options are very limited. So this was, as a chef, I felt like, how can I change that, the footprint I've done a little bit, but also what comes out of urban America, and use specifically Harlem work with Harlem as a platform, because we go back to a place like Harlem for culture or for music or for history, and hopefully one day also for food. So I felt it was a very important place to start working from, not because like most chefs, I've done a lot of charities, and they were all great, but I was a little bit removed because I wasn't working in those communities. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to see if I could, how would this change if I placed myself right there? And it changed my life forever.
So, Tom, I'd be interested in your view on this, because your soapbox, your bully pulpit, takes a wider view, a federal view, if you will. How do we as a nation go about making good food available to people who live in poverty outside of voting?
Mm-hmm. First off, I just want to say I thought I had a pretty good sock game going on.
Yeah,
until I saw this over here. I got to go back and do some work now. Thanks, Marcus.
All right.
Sam, you've got a little action in the back.
But it's nothing. I mean, this is like, I'm like, Brooks.
I see you, Sam.
No, so seriously.
It's incredible. Somebody get that on Instagram. Those are different socks.
Yeah, yes.
And yet stylish.
Yeah, but they're both Swedish.
Of course.
Even better.
Of course. Are those from Elizabeth?
Anyway.
Don't dodge the question.
Yeah.
Singer used to be an Elizabeth, okay? So don't be Elizabeth. Anyway. So what's the question again?
I
love that.
Dodging it, slipping, sliding. The question is, what can you do outside of voting, outside of the franchise, to improve access to good food among our poorest citizens?
Well, listen, I think that it's very easy to demonize someone for making poor choices. You hear it all the time, especially during the Farm Bill debate and around hunger issues. You heard people say, well, people are just making bad choices. They're giving their food their kids junk food. They're buying soda. They're feeding them ramen noodles, as if actually someone with limited dollars has a choice. If they could find if food is accessible to them, that's one issue. The other issue is, can they afford it? Okay, and so when you're feeding your family, you're gonna buy the most calories you can as cheaply as possible, because you have very little dollars to spend. So this can go right to how we subsidize. Several people have mentioned this today. Sort of right to agricultural subsidies. What do we choose to subsidize? What's interesting? Everybody kind of focuses on business, and we're subsidizing this. Last I checked, it's our tax dollars that are going to subsidize this. And yet we're pretending that we're not complicit in this. And when I say complicit, because we are not holding our leaders accountable to a better food system. and that has to change. We have to elect people who actually talk about these issues and make sure that they are voting the way that we would like them to vote. And if they don't, let's get them the hell out of office.
So, Andrea, we face a paradox here, essentially. We've got a world that Tom describes accurately. We decry every day the nation's obesity crisis. We talk about food deserts. We talk about a tax on food stamps. And yet, in rooms like this one, in cities on the coasts, we also talk about how there's really never been a better time to eat food in America. There are great restaurants in cities that never had great restaurants before. There's amazing food available at more supermarkets than ever before. How do we square this paradox? What do we do about it? And what role can those very proponents of the great food in America play in doing that?
Well, I mean, I think we could acknowledge that this abundance that we see and enjoy when we go to the grocery store is an illusion. And the abundance that we offer in our restaurants is also somehow tied into that illusion. The huge menus, the huge portions, et cetera. You know, I mean, I think that that's one role that chefs can play, is starting to kind of get some reality into the way we see food. Obviously, up here, you know, Dan is doing remarkable things with waste. But there's a whole system that, which is a fantasy, which goes into kind of creating this idea that we're just in this great moment. Because this great moment might just be for this moment, right? And in 15 years, we're going to be on the decline, or in 8 years, or maybe now. Maybe we already are in terms of peak food and peak availability. So, I mean, I think that's really part of the whole picture. In terms of just this idea that we are in this abundance, though, I mean, many of us have this abundance. People just right around the corner don't. You know, I know farmers who grow chickens. I know one person in particular who raises about 1,000 chickens a year for us, and they don't eat their own chickens. They go to the grocery store to buy Tyson chickens.
So let's unpack that a little bit. I'm really, one of the sort of fashionable things of life in a modern city is community-supported agriculture. And we take a great pride in picking up our box and bemoaning like, oh my God, we have all this blank and we got to figure out what to do with it. That's a real problem for upper middle class people.
What do I do with one kohlrabi?
I don't even know what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's going on. Do you see a role for CSAs within impoverished communities? And Tom, what's going on with CSAs and food stamps?
Well, now it's actually, you can use SNAP dollars to purchase CSAs. Michael mentioned that earlier today. Michelle Nisha mentioned that earlier. I'm sorry. But you know, I think that part of the, I don't want to say problem, but unless we get people who are in the communities that we're trying to help, they need to actually have a place at the table too and tell us what they want, what they need. They need to take some action themselves. Karen Washington, who I spoke with at something very similar to this a couple weeks ago, she's just incredible, and her message is that the people who are looking for change need to also take action themselves. Sure. And so you have, and this is why I think it's such important, you know, work that Marcus is doing, getting actually in the communities and finding out what the communities want, and it's something that, you know, I wish I did more of, and I just don't. I'm limited time to participate, but I think we need to hear from everyone.
But I think also there's a couple of things. Just the beauty of America is that we're so complex and so different, right? We don't have one. We're one of the few countries in the world that don't have one food identity, and that's the beauty. But it's also the complexity. So the only 2 times a year we actually eat the same as a nation. It's like Thanksgiving and like Super Bowl, right?
Right.
But that's the only time. Like, think any other country in the world, we eat together. Therefore, we know a higher purpose. Why are we eating this dish and why we're not eating this dish? That is a very powerful thing, right? The other thing is that somehow we traded in all of this intellectual and incredible sort of improved society. We traded what I think is actually a muscle or a tool that we should sort of get back. It's the simple thing that if we would know how to cook. You don't have to be great chefs or anything, but just a simple tool. If you know how to cook, if every person would know how to cook, the choices after that is much clearer, right? And this is the simplest tool that every economy, and there's, again, where I go back to like a third world country, a 10-year-old knows how to cook. Now that might be too early, but a 15-year-old knows how to then to cook and to purchase and what to purpose and what do I do with my 40% leftovers, right? So become a cycle of, just like when you're 11 or 10, you know how to swim.
But there are swim teachers, Marcus.
Yes.
So my question would be, and I put this to all of you, I mean, there are
so I focused on that, right?
Okay.
So one of the things we focus on is cooking classes. So I have a cooking class in my restaurant for free once a month, and then we do them also at the farmers market, right? But through the cooking classes, I realized this dialogue that back in the days, poor people knew at least how to cook. But in the aspirational society to become next step, they traded away a lot of the basic know-how how to cook. Now that's a double bad trade-off. Mm-hmm. That is a real issue. So now I'm poor, I don't have enough money, and now I also don't know how to cook. At least if I knew how to cook, I could almost liberate myself out of this. At least I can do roasted chicken, chicken soup, and chicken dumpling, right? And we ate well, but we were poor. So now we are poor, and we don't know how to cook.
Right.
Bad combo.
So beyond cooking classes at the Red Rooster, what can we do? What can you do? You guys have that bully pulpit to increase not just a knowledge of what's going on with the state of food in America, but how actually to prepare it.
Food education in schools, starting pre-K. We need to educate a population. We're a generation removed from actually having any skills at all in the kitchen and knowing where food comes from. Yeah. So I think that's a great start.
Andrea, you with that?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, free school lunch would go a long way just in terms of education, because once you have free school lunch, there's a whole bunch of things that have to come into place in that school. It needs to become education for many reasons. We do a weekly cooking class at Lantern during the school year for 14 kids. They come in every week. Then it kind of builds each semester to a family dinner with all their families, and they get to show off and really make dinner for their families, and then we all kind of sit together and eat. And that's been, incredible. It's been like the most rewarding thing that I've really done in the restaurant in a long time. But I think also just this idea, and what Marcus does and what Tom does as well, is like, let's not publish ingredients lists of 40 ingredients in our cookbooks. I mean, I think that's like a really important thing about us starting to figure out ways of not mystifying cooking, but demystifying cooking. Mm-hmm. It's an important role that chefs can play. And also just tearing down the restaurant walls and making our restaurants more accessible to the community. Yeah. When people email us about a recipe that they ate in the restaurant, sending it back to them, like having somebody on staff that can do that. I think all those things can be valuable in terms of bringing in people that are not chefs into our restaurants to cook dinners as well, just people from the community. That's really fun, and people love it.
Let's go back to the education piece. So my two kids, 4 and 6, are in Berkeley Carroll in Brooklyn. Your kids went to St. Anne's? Is that
Yep.
Right? Okay. So in the school lunchroom, they actually teach kids at a very young age. The kids are involved in planning out lunches for the week. And I sit there and say, well, yeah, this is great. This is available to my kids and they're in private school. Why the hell isn't this available to every single kid who's going to school? And the answer is money. And it's not that we don't have enough. We don't have the political will to make that happen. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about political will. We're deep in the middle of a contentious election cycle. It says the chef's, there it is, bully pulpit. Let's use the bully pulpit right now to offer the next president of the United States some advice on food and food policy. Not you, Tom. We'll get back to you. Andrea, you want to start?
I think that from a kind of, a very kind of abstract point of view, thinking about food as tying into every single problem that we have is the answer. Now, I was told this morning in a conversation that we're never going to get a more progressive administration that's more proactive on food issues than this administration, and we have squandered it. that might be the case, or we're not appreciative enough of the gains that we've made in the last 8 years. I think that with awareness and with the amazing statistics that you've unearthed, I think that there is going to be big changes happening as long as we are the solution. I don't think that there's a governmental solution. I think that we need to push the lever.
Nevertheless, Marcus, you are in the Oval Office advising the President of the United States. What are you saying?
I mean, I want to go back to
Which
Tom.
is a great image.
I want to go back. I want to go back to Tom's, because I think the educational cooking classes in school is super important. And then the other big liberator is always going to be food and technology, right? So you can really, because it really goes for everyone, that we can get recipes and we can get content to food in a popular, simple way. And then the third level is that how do you make food that is healthy, also delicious? I know this step, if it's not delicious, right, that's when you lose so many people. And I think that the tech piece, the technology piece, because if you're going to start with kids that are born 2007, 2008, if it is no technology component to that, they're not going to get engaged. In Sweden, not bigger than Connecticut, but I'm going to bring it up as an example. Every Friday, my two sisters get the weekly menu for their kids emailed to them, and if they have any religious or diet or allergies, here's the second option. And you have to email back. So the parents have to participate and email back before 5 o'clock, whatever, on Friday. So on Monday, when the kids go to school, they have, they can get the second option, right?
Tough to scale.
Tough to scale, but
not impossible.
This is public school. This is not private school. So there are examples. I get it. It's a pretty much homogeneous population, but there's things that we can do at least. And my food memories growing up, aside from my family, come from the lunches that I had at school, where I really actually started to develop a real sense of flavor, right? Because it was real food, not what we have right now, right? And I don't know if I would not have been a chef if I wouldn't have had those real school lunches. Because at my house, we lived on the fish, we lived on the waters. We ate fish, we ate very much what we had, right? So it was almost like going to a restaurant, starting to experience other dishes, right? And how incredible when we're such a diverse country. Imagine if the school lunches would be really good and really diverse. This now evokes interest. We've had the cooking classes earlier that morning. The recipe maybe gets to you through your phone. Now you have a full engagement of a young population about food. Their choices at 18, 25, at 30 looks completely different than right now.
Could a new president stop that conversation, that rolling tide of Samuelsson? I doubt it. That's an excellent answer. Thank you.
Back.
I want to talk now.
Let me just
Rebuttal.
quick rebuttal.
Rebuttal? Oh, right. Because in Elizabeth,
I disagree a little bit with Andrea. All social movements start at the grassroots level. And at some point, they turn to political movements. If you look at the civil rights movement, if you look at the issue of marriage equality, these all start at the grassroots level, and then at a certain point, it has to bubble up to the political, and then we have to actually have political change to make these things happen.
Yeah.
And if you look how quick the marriage equality piece just changed.
Yeah.
And so you have to get the population to actually force government to do our will. But without...
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, but their moment of chemical conversion, like it happened with marriage equality, has to happen.
Oh, yeah.
And it has to happen here.
Sure.
It's not going to happen electorally.
Right. And I have to say, because there's a lot of talk about bad farming, good farming,
it's
good farming,
unbelievable.
bad farming, we have to be inclusive because there are answers all over to this.
But let's go back point, right? Why did it happen so quickly? Because we decided as a generation that it mattered, right? If you look at in general, that's why it's important what Tom does to get us a seat there. Because if you would speak to the U.S. Congress, where do you think food matters to them? They live in a town where Morton is king, to begin with. right?
Jose Andres would take.
Well, okay. But so the food for them is just not on that level where it matters, right? On the same level. So I'm just thinking about it is things start to connect generationally because we all think it's important, whether it was civil rights or gay movement, equality movement, the same thing, right? And through technology, we can now make it much quicker. And just one last thing that I want to think. This issue doesn't just obviously happen in urban America, what we've talked about. I just cooked this great dinner at a farm in Indiana. It felt so good, had the most amazing things. And as we were driving back to the hotel, I'm 500 yards away from the farm. It's the most amazing farm I've ever been to in my life.
Hey.
It was like
Hey.
second most amazing farm.
Have you been outside?
Right before we stopped in front of the hotel, 500 yards away from this farm, you have this classic American corner. So there is McDonald's over there, Dwayne Reed over here, 7-Eleven selling something there, and Burger King over here. And I was like, how can this be? So I asked the driver, oh, no, there's no food that stays in Indiana. We send everything out. And he knew it like, that's like, of course, we don't get any of that stuff. No, we eat canned food like everybody else. So we think sometimes it just happened in certain areas. It's happening across the country.
But nonetheless, you're on that farm cooking a meal. I know that Tom has done similar, and so has Andrea. So maybe you're spreading the gospel, and that's another part of your gig. We're running a little low on time, but I want to talk about, it's tough to go from marriage equality to something like the minimum wage, but there's a rising chefs movement here. Tom has taken a step in the direction of eliminating tipping at lunch at Kraft, taking a look at seeing whether that's possible at dinner. Danny Meyer announced last week that he would be eliminating tipping in all 13 of his New York restaurants. This has nothing to do with us as diners, or very little to do with us as diners. It has much more to do with increasing wages in the back of the restaurant, that is to say, on the line with kitchen workers. We have in New York a rise in the minimum wage coming. Does Meyer's decision begin to affect yours, Tom, at night? And Marcus, you with a lot of minimum wage workers, how are you thinking about it?
I was actually talking about it on the way up here, because it will affect, and I think about it that the majority of my customers are not expense account customers, these regular people paying. And eventually it has to do with the consumer, because we have to raise the prices, right? And it's different when you just sign one bill versus you paying yourself. And I'm thinking this through a lot. And for example, in Sweden, in our restaurant there's been no tipping forever, so it's a non-issue. But it's a different audience. I do think the neighborhood restaurants will be affected in a very different way, and some of them will have to close, because it's become, the margin were already small, and it's just going to become smaller and smaller.
Is that true for you as well, Andrea?
I think every restaurant has a different problem with this, and I think the waiters are the most highly paid people.
What's the sub-minimum in North Carolina?
It's $2.13.
$2.13?
Yeah.
So that's $2.13 for waiters who are receiving tips.
Yeah.
I love a country where we have a sub-minimum wage.
Yeah. So, and the rule in North Carolina is that an auto grat actually becomes property of the restaurant, and then you can distribute it any way you want. So something that we're looking at now is auto-gratting everything, and then just redistributing that.
New York
you guys
cannot
can't
do
do it.
No, there's a consumer protection law in the books from getting back to the 1920s that prohibit us from doing that.
Yeah, consumers are unprotected, mercifully unprotected in North Carolina. But I think some of our friends and colleagues, like Maria Hines in Seattle, has been working on this for a number of years. In all of her restaurants, there's a point system, and there's a tip share between the back of house and front of house. So lots of chefs are working on this in different ways all over the country.
That's.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, right.
That's very dicey. You asked the question, does it make it easier, Danny, announcing this? Yeah, it definitely plows the field. I may have made a decision, but I'm just not there yet.
You don't want to break news on stage at the Food for Tomorrow conference?
And here's.
Can I take that as a yes? You are Kraft?
We'd love to break news, but here's the difficulty, and you say the dining public actually has to come along for this.
Yeah.
They have to be okay with looking at prices that are about 22, 23% higher.
Yeah.
And not worry about the fact that, I hear things like, well, this is the end of a service. If I can't tip someone, the service is going to be terrible. Well, gee, is your doctor give you terrible service because you don't tip them? Right. It's just, we just need to rethink this. It's crazy that people think they can only get good service if they leave a tip. If that's the case, just tip someone before you sit down or as you sit down. So here's your $50 bill, but give me good service now.
That works at Peter Luger.
That could work.
Yeah. It works at Peter Luger.
But you know what? If you don't like the experience, don't come back. Yeah. I'll take care of the server. But I should pay. Listen, the level of service that you get. There's studies done. Cornell University did a study. The level of service you get the level of tip you leave has absolutely nothing to do with service. It has more to do with the color of your skin, your accent, your gender, and certain attributes thereof. Yeah. So it's not this level of service that people are tipping on. And I don't understand why someone would want to come to work. And this on the waiter side. Why a waiter would want to come to work and have to leave the decision up to how much money they're going to make up to someone who may just not like the color of their skin, not like their accent, not like the fact that someone slapped their hand away, or they're just having a shitty day. And so I think that employers should pay their employees.
So it sounds like you just broke news.
Yeah,
you broke news.
It did.
What I need to make up my mind is to know that my business isn't going to erode by 30% after I make this decision. At lunch, I'm not open for lunch. This was when I first opened for lunch, so I don't have a lunch business yet. So there's really nothing to lose.
Right.
But if
So you'll watch Danny carefully, but we see that you are positively inclined to move in this direction. Would that be accurate?
I did it before he announced that, and this is something that Danny and I talked about in 1994 when we opened Gramercy Tavern. We had this discussion, and neither one of us had the chutzpah to do it back then.
Well, you have the chutzpah today, and so do the two of you, and it's been a real joy to be up here and sharing the bully pulpit with the three of you. I know it's been a pleasure for these guys, and I'd like to thank you very much for joining the New York Times.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.